Guess who's back? Back again. Guess who's back? 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 Guess who's back?
Delicious. Delicious.
What the f*** you doing to that show? Huh? One day it's on Wednesday night, then it's on Monday night,
Yes.
on midnight. I can't find this f***ing show.
Well, we have moved the time slot.
Yeah, what's that about?
I'm just waiting for a mate. I've been packed here all day. Excuse me, I've been packed here all day.
We just falling.
Sorry. I've been packed here all day. Well, I wouldn't say all day. At least
How long you reckon?
30 minutes. I've been packed there for at least 30 seconds.
Unbelievable! There's your sealer!
No, just
Call my lawyer
can I just
now.
say my piece?
Now call my lawyer. Yeah, I know you're the police. Sorry.
Not Morris Rioli, but Cyril Rioli, and going with magic. Oh, he's a beauty. Oh, don't you love him? Richo, you just keep him on top. Keep him on top.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
You are a wanker, Andy Marr. And I'll be honest, I didn't know that was coming, but I'll say it again, you are a wanker.
Just throwing a whole tray of food on me.
A whole tray.
Nick off, I'm not working with those.
Shut up.
Neck minute.
Assault! You touched me, officer, sorry.
And there's your kill shot.
13! Can you believe it? On the buzzer!
Stand by your man and tell the world you love him.
Is it Lewis Taylor, the one that we saw, who just ran around like a head without a chook?
Like a head without a chook?
A head without a chook.
We're not always going to get it right, and sometimes you're not going to agree with us. But that's okay, because just like you, we care. Just like you, we're passionate about the game.
I'm paying money. The girl's happy. She's got no money. I'm paying money. I got my rocks off. How good is this? How good is this? I got my rocks off. Got my rocks off. Honey, I'm invincible. I'm paying money. I'm invincible. Invincible. She's got no money. The girl's happy. I got my rocks off.
Welcome to the 2013 season of Bound for Glory Radio. Football news every week, breaking news, we'll take it to you every weekend. My name is Matt Joyce, just go around the panel here.
I'm Ethan Meldrum. I'm Matt Marsden.
I'm Ashley Craven.
I'm David Jackman.
And we've got a special guest here today, Rohan Connolly.
How are you doing, Rohan?
Special anymore.
Hello,
He's been
everyone.
here 3 times.
Hi everyone, hi guys and girl. Good to be here and love the show, so glad to be part of it.
Thanks very much for showing up again.
You're basically a regular here now. It's your 3rd appearance. You're basically a veteran.
Mainstay of the show.
Part of the furniture.
So we had the NAB Cup last night, Brisbane against Carlton.
Yeah, amongst a fair few issues, a few minor issues we've had over the pre-season, if we just want to rattle them off, some minor issues like, I don't know, 2 major drug scandals, possibly.
Maybe,
But we kick off with the NAB Cup.
Well, it's the most recent news. Let's talk about that first, and then we'll get into the drugs and all that stuff afterwards, as well as discussing previews for every team for the year, rule changes, as well as the growing divide between the rich and the poor clubs. So yeah, last night.
Well, it was a big game, of course. Two teams that missed the 8 last year, very hyped to both make it, I suppose. And, well, we've seen Brisbane in fantastic form throughout the pre-season. We've seen a lot of newer players stepping up. We have Brent Maloney, of course, moving from Melbourne. Pat Carnesis moving to the midfield, and he's looked fantastic.
Brownie, I reckon he played a good game last night, considering he's on his last legs.
Yeah, he's getting on a bit. He looked a bit slow towards the start, but ended up with 5 goals, a bag. It's still quite impressive.
It's a pretty misleading 5 goals, though. I mean, 2 of the goals in the first half came from pretty ordinary free kicks, and he also dropped a few really basic marks in the forward line. And probably the most telling thing is he lost a lot of the one-on-ones that he had in the first half, and they're the sort of bread and butter Brown's had over his career.
I think regardless, 5 goals is 5 goals, and it doesn't matter how you get them as long as you do get them. So Brown kicked 5 goals last night. That's what's going to go down the stat sheet, and it was a pretty important contribution that really helped his team get over the line.
How accurate of an indication of a performance was that? Firstly, from Brisbane. I mean, we know they're a good team, but they looked a class above last night. Is that a real indication of the team that we're probably going to see in the home and away season or not?
Well, they were always going to be one of the teams that really stepped up to challenge for a spot in the 8. With Carlton, Essendon, Richmond, and maybe even St Kilda can have one last crack at it. It was always going to be Brisbane as one of those teams. So they showed what they're capable of, and they've certainly got a lot of good quality youngsters coming through. Surprised I didn't see Polek. What's happening with him? Is he injured still? Or?
I wouldn't have the slightest clue.
Look, for what it's worth, I think the NAB Cup has become a really fail-safe indicator of the year ahead, and they're starting to remind me a bit of Adelaide last year, and that's not to say they're going to end up top 4, but it's such a great roll call of talent the Lions have now, and another good indicator for this year, I think, is the fact that they finished only 13th last year, but they won 10 games in the process. Now, that hasn't been done before, and people say, well, who do they beat? And they did knock over some ordinary teams, but they also knocked over West Coast and Adelaide. So I looked at them last night, and you could tell that they've been up longer than Carlton have. There was a bit of a sort of fitness gap there, but very, very impressive. And look, I had to do my ladder for the age a few weeks back, and I didn't have them in the 8, but I'm starting to feel very nervous about that because I just think that midfield has improved out of sight very quickly. They're all on the improve, and I can see them really surprising people this year.
I think if you watched the NAB Cup Grand Final last night, it was a clear example of just how good and how fast that midfield is for Brisbane, especially the run and spread when they do win the ball from hit-outs and in contested situations. They just got the ball forward extremely quick, and if they play the way they did last night, a lot of teams are going to struggle to beat them.
I think when you actually look down their list, it sort of hits you just how much talent there is, because you've had Rich, Red and Rockcliffe, the 3 Rs. They've been around a few years now, and people for a while said, okay, it's about them. But then have a look at the people on top of that. Zorko, really classy player. He stood out last year. Clay Beams is one I really like a lot. Like, he hasn't necessarily played a lot, but everything he's done has been classy. Josh Green up forward has sort of made Todd Banfield almost redundant. The big one for me is going to be Carnesis, as you said, in the midfield. That's been a massive... And he just looks... There's something a bit Scott Pendlebury-ish about him. He's a good mover, he's tallish, just a real good footy sense about him. I think a real key for them is going to be Aaron Cornelius, who didn't do anything last night, but has had a good pre-season. And if he stands up and supports Brown, that'll enable Merritt to play permanently in the back line, and Merritt he was terrific last night. Well, so they tick all the boxes, I think.
Merritt had 21% last night, which was just an incredible number. And I think one player that we haven't mentioned yet is Pierce Hanley, who I think he moved to the midfield occasionally last year, and I think once he moves there full time, which I think is inevitable with players like Doherty, it is.
Doherty and Sam Mays.
And Sam Mays could play off half-back, and Jed Adcock as well. I think once Pierce Hanley was in the midfield, he's fantastic disposal of the ball. He went at 90% last night for his 30 disposals, that's a fairly astounding figure. So I think he's going to be an absolute key to their midfield.
And I think, the one thing I wrote about this during the week, that it was such a disaster, that whole trade gambit for them 4 years ago. And we were talking about that setting them back 5 years in terms of their development, and it just hasn't been the case. To me, it sort of indicates that it's perhaps not that big a gamble going for established players from other clubs, because as long as you keep a handful of selections each year to expend on young talent through the under-18 comp, you're going to have enough coming through, and it's the development that's the key. And since the disaster of '09, in terms of their recruiting, Voss has been very systematic about pushing these guys through, and they've all now had a bit of football, and they're developing so rapidly. It's just all coming together very quickly, I think, given where they were at the time. Favolo blew another gasket and it all sort of came unstuck.
Well, what about Carlton on the other hand? I mean, the team that we saw last night really wasn't anything like the team we'd seen for the 3 games or 4 games technically beforehand. What do we read into that? Was it a false indication, or was the performances earlier in the pre-season more of a false indication of how the team's going to shape up?
Look, it just looked to me, it's hard to say unless you're actually there seeing what they're doing, but it just looked to me superficially like Brisbane were 2 or 3 weeks ahead of where Carlton were physically. And at the start of the year, that can really have a big difference. The longer the year goes on, the more the fitness equation gets sort of levelled out. But Brisbane, to me, looked, a lot more up than Carlton were. Look, I think Carlton's going to have a really good year. I think their list is good. I think there's a lot more flexibility about the lineup now. I think there's more options in attack, and they're very well coached. And I'm pretty confident they'll have a pretty good year, and will finish higher on the ladder than Brisbane. But that doesn't mean Brisbane isn't coming. It's and again, just on the NAB Cup, I mean, the number of times now you see a team do well and then go on to do well in the season proper. I did my rudimentary grasp on maths means it could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure since 2000 there's been 26 NAB Cup grand finalists, and 21 of them have gone on to play finals, and 7 of them have ended up playing in a day grand final. So it's funny because Carlton won a couple back in 05 and 07 and went nowhere, and everyone said, you can't read anything into the NAB Cup. But those glitches aside, you actually can read a lot into the NAB Cup. So, look, Carlton's progress through the NAB Cup, I think, a good indicator that they'll have a reasonable year, and likewise with the Lions.
I think there was a stat that the last 5 teams that have won the NAB Cup have been top 4 for the year. So that's pretty significant to see there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it means less, I guess, to the clubs that we're used to seeing up there. So, Collingwood won it a couple of years ago against Essendon, no big deal for them. But if you're looking at a side to improve and they have a really good NAB Cup, I think, get on them for the season proper.
What about indicators for teams like Hawthorn, who didn't win any games, and for West Coast and Sydney, who only won 1 game each? What would that indicate?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Hawthorn, look, I think I've tipped Hawthorn runner-up, which could be a bit sadistic of me, but I think, I wouldn't read too much into that. Again, I think preparation comes into it, and you see now that teams that make the day grand final, they're often up to 6-7 weeks behind teams that didn't make the final. So I think Hawthorn's been easing into it. The problem with that for the Hawks is that if you have a look at their draw, they play every other finalist from last year in the first 7 weeks of the season. And last year they started pretty slowly. They were 5-4 after 9 games. If they start as sort of slowly as they did last year with this draw, they'll almost be out of contention. So they'd be wary of that. They've had a bit go against them too, haven't they? I mean, Suckling is a big loss for them. He's a really important distributor off half-back. The young kid, Woodward, went down. They had reasonably high hopes for him. I'm beginning to wonder about, Sewell, Mitchell, these guys, just in terms of getting on a bit and how much is left in them. And also the scope for improvement. Like, I look at Hawthorn, I think, what's going to make them a significantly better team than they were, as good as they were, and I wonder about that. Whereas with, say, West Coast and Freo, just as an example, I look at those two sides and I say, well, they'll be better again because of A, B, C and D. Mm-hmm. So I think Hawthorn will be up there. The Eagles, I've actually tipped the Eagles to win the flag this year.
Yeah, so have I.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because when I did it, I sat down to do my ladder and I thought, yeah, I'm going to tip them. And I thought, I was sitting there a bit cocky and thinking, everyone will look at this and they'll go, one out of the box there. And every man and his dog now seems to be tipping him for the flag. So there's very good reasons for that. And who's the other one you mentioned? Sydney? Sydney, well, it's sort of part of Sydney's Bloods culture that you never try during the pre-season. So they'll be up and about again, no doubt.
And of course the Doggies got their first win in how many weeks?
Since round 12 of
I think it was
2012,
June 27 last year. Someone said it was 250 odd days. Yeah, I did that game when they beat Hawthorn, and there's a lot of doom and gloom about the Doggies, and I think it was a really important win for them just to sort of look at some of the young kids and think, yeah, well, there is scope there, and you're seeing Jordan Roughhead's been really impressive for them. Clay Smith's another one who I think is pretty exciting, but they've got a long road ahead of them. I think their biggest deficiency is probably their skill level. Their skills to me seem way below that of most of the other sides. So, but look, Brendan McCartney's a good teaching coach. That's his reputation, and as long as they're patient, they'll get there in the end, I guess.
And we will go into more details about each team later on in the show, so stick around for that. At the moment, there was those two massive stories that broke over the pre-season and sort of kept us busy straight after the whole Tippett-Sydney saga, farce, whatever you want to call it. And it all started off with Collingwood, I suppose.
There was a Caro story on Dane Swan, which I think was pretty interesting. We had...
Accurate, though.
Yeah, accurate.
That's the story that Caro broke. Was it back in October of last year, or was it November, around that area?
I think it was November.
Yeah. And Collingwood never denied it as well.
Well, wasn't it, when you say broke a story, it wasn't so much a news story as a comment piece, I suppose. And yeah, look, it was interesting, the reaction to that, and a lot was made of Collingwood's lack of support for him on the back of that. Yeah, look, the whole drugs issue, it's really escalated, hasn't it? My big hobby horse, I suppose, has been that I'm not that big on punishing guys about recreational drugs. I understand why there's interest in it. I understand, if not agree with the role model argument. But to me, the only thing that really matters at the end of the day is the integrity of the competition. So what guys put into their bodies, if it's not giving them an artificial advantage, it's up to them, however damaging it is. When you get to performance enhancement drugs, as we saw that one explode a bit later in the off-season, that's the big thing for me. So, I must say the Dane Swan stuff and that sparked another round of, drugs in football stories. My eyes sort of glaze over a bit with a lot of them, but performance-enhancing drugs, I think like everyone else, I just went, Jesus, we've really got a potentially massive problem on our hands. And we still do, though. I think, there's a hell of a lot of speculation going on that's not necessarily informed, or, the fact is we still really don't know what's going on. We're still getting to the bottom of it, and my take on it's basically just been that until we do have definitive findings from the, how many, 68 different investigations going on, we just need to sort of sit back a bit and not rush to judgment. So, in a media sense, some of the calls for James Hird to resign and this person to resign, they've annoyed me a bit, because I just don't think...
Well, you can't prove any of it.
Well,
they're under investigation, that's all we know.
No, exactly. And look, they may not be able to prove any of it even at the end of the investigation. There is a general sense, I think, that the AFL is going to do what it can to ensure Essendon gets to play in the competition at least, and the Cronulla thing, I think there are ways that's similar to Essendon, and there are more ways it's probably not similar. So, look, it's a very tangled web. The bottom line is, we don't want football to end up as cycling now looks, where people are looking at, the greatest cyclist of all time, greatest in commas, cyclist of all time, and going, well, I can't believe anything anymore, and we've got to make sure we don't get that, in football, and I really understand that. But at the same time, we also don't want to be jumping at shadows, so we've got to be careful sort of where we sit with it.
Have any of the Cronulla players actually taken that 6-month ban that they were supposedly offered by?
You got me there. My NRL knowledge isn't that flash, but you know, look, from what I understand, I mean the whole sort of the NRL players and the coaching staff haven't been as ignorant to the practices as the Essendon people appear to have been, and I think that's pretty important. And it's interesting how people's attitudes are gradually softening in terms of the punishment, aren't they? Because when it came out, a lot of people were sort of taking the view that, well, the WADA code doesn't allow for ignorance as an excuse. You know, it's a minimum 2-year ban, and people are now sort of almost creating the leeway for that to be a viable way of not suspending these players, which I think is fair enough. I mean, ultimately, whatever the code is, I think if you were completely ignorant of, you know, or you were told you were being given something and it turned out it was banned when you were under the impression it wasn't, I'm not sure you should be carrying the can for that. You know, I don't think that's particularly fair.
But how can you prove that you didn't know? That's the thing.
Well, how can you prove that you did know?
There's conflicting stories, though. Because Mark McVeigh came out and said, you know, we signed a waiver, we knew exactly what was going into our bodies, like the vitamin C, right? He did that very soon after it broke. But I think I heard Andrew Welsh come out recently and say, you know, players had no idea what they were taking. So it was kind of a conflicting story.
Yeah, well, Welshie's now in the film industry, and so clearly the drugs are playing on his mind as well. No, just kidding, Welshie, if you happen to hear this. But again, look, I just think, you know, maybe I'm sort of getting old and too reasonable, but I just want to sit back and sort of wait till everything is there before us and then go, okay, well, based on that, this is what should happen. But as the information continues to pour out, we've got to stop saying this should happen and then a new bit of information comes out and we change our mind on that. We'd just be better off sort of sitting back, as frustrating as it is, because it'll take a fair time. But just we have to sort of sit back and see it unfold.
And with the ASADA, do you think they're kind of grandstanding a little bit, saying like, you know, they had their big announcement in Canberra saying, you know, we will catch you, and, you know, they're offering this ban to NRL. Do you think, Cronulla, sorry. Do you think that, you know, they're kind of doing that without actually having complete solid proof? Do you think they're kind of trying to catch out people and get them to admit it without having 100% solid proof?
Yeah, look, it did have that sort of political grandstanding look about it, and I wonder if, given their time again, they might approach it a bit differently, or, you know, be more inclined to do it a month out from an election rather than 6 months out. You know, so I think a lot of us in the sports media sort of smelt a bit of a rat with the way it was done. Then again, you know, we're not privy to how their investigative procedures happen and you know, how long they take. And, you know, my understanding is it can be quite a slow process, and so that's why, I guess that's the main reason perhaps they jump too early, because it means we're sentenced to, you know, 7 or 8 months of speculation. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm so sick of, you know, sort of newspaper speculation about anything, you know, like say contract stories, you know. And the one good thing about the drugs thing actually was it meant we stopped talking about Buddy Franklin's contract for 5 minutes. But if this one ends, we'll go back to that. I hate that sort of stuff. You know, it's at some stage you've got to just stop it and actually concentrate on what's going on before you at that moment.
Yeah, I think it was this year was one of the first years in recent memory where people were actually excited for the NAB Cup, because it was refreshing to actually start watching and talking about the football that's going on the field. I just want to touch back on the Collingwood role model topic of, you know, we all sort of, I think we can sort of agree that performance enhancing drugs are more of a bigger issue in football than recreational drugs. But at the end of the day, if they have been proven to taking recreational drugs, they are role models, and that's the bottom line, is they are role models, and they shouldn't really be, you know, they have that public image and they shouldn't be meddling with that sort of stuff.
Look, I understand that argument. I'm a supporter of the 3 strikes policy, though, because I think
But it's not enforced. The 3 strikes rule appears to
well,
be
willy-nilly. There are clear loopholes in it that I think that they are going to address. But you've got to remember that, the players didn't have to be part of this. They dobbed themselves in to do this, which, if you're talking about role models, I think that was a sort of, noble step in itself. And you can turn around and say, well, they've agreed to be part of the code, well, then they have to adhere to it. But for me, the bottom line has to be, it's not about punishing people, it's about helping people. So if a guy does have a drug problem, to me it's far more important that he gets the requisite help, and in that sense a 3 strikes policy might be what is required for them. There's not many people who get off a drug problem who are able to just go bang, it's over. You stumble along the way, and we saw that with the one sort of proven case we've had of the 3 strikes, Travis Tuck. He had all sorts of problems. So the role model thing, I don't know. I understand that they're role models, but I think if you're a parent, and I am, and you're wanting your kids to adopt footballers as role models, you're pretty short of role models. I think parents are probably the best sort of. Well, maybe not in my case, but you'd like to think that parents are the best role models for children, not AFL footballers.
Because surely the clubs have some sort of duty of care for their players. So, you sort of want this rule to be in place. Like, I think the 3 strike rule is quite good. A few modifications, like you said, need to be made, but it is good that you can't just let players have free roam of you're a football player, you're a superstar, especially in Melbourne and fish bowls like Adelaide and Perth. It sort of is kind of needed to have that sort of restriction to kind of keep players in check. I'm not sure if we shouldn't be babying players, but it is all about the players' welfare at the end of the day. And as supporters as well, you're going to get the best spectacle if players are fit and healthy and able to perform at their best level.
I think there's got to be a balance. I think it was interesting with the Essendon thing that they, the club called in the parents of the players. And, I was thinking, well, that's a bit odd in Dustin Fletcher's case, given that he's a parent, so they
could
call
be
in...
parents of half of the Essendon players.
Well, exactly. Look, some of them are really young and really naive, and that's probably appropriate. Others, that's not the case. So, it's treading a line. But there is, as you say, there is a duty of care clubs have to exercise for their players. In the same way that any employer has a duty of care to its employees. Now, some exercise that option a lot better than others in a corporate sense. In a sporting sense, they tend to look after them pretty well. But, we're always sort of finding that right balance, I think, between sort of civil liberties and image of the game, and it's a tough one. I don't think there are easy answers. So that's why I get a bit annoyed when people start sort of jumping up and down saying, he used drugs, he must be drummed out of the game. I don't think it's that simple, and I think a lot of people that make those calls have plenty of skeletons in their closets too. I know I've got a few in mine. So, I'm loath to sort of be standing on a moral high horse and saying to other people, don't take drugs, drugs bad and gay.
It's amazing, I think, with the Essendon saga.
I do like South Park.
It's amazing with the Essendon saga how much trust, it shows how much trust the players actually have in the medicos. The media are blaming the players, they should be rubbed out, whatever, but they're not well versed in the medicine side of things and what's actually going to their body. So I think it's more the club itself. And it's come out they didn't do background checks on the medicos and the doctors and stuff.
No, it's a really good point, and I think it's a function of... See, clubs set themselves up as very professional, full-time professionals, and have for a long time. But, when you go inside some clubs, you see that, in a lot of ways, culturally, they're still sort of suburban footy clubs. And I think with things like, football departments have got so big, and that whole sports science sort of offshoot of that has got so big, that, I got quite annoyed with people saying, well, how could James Hird not know what's going on? I don't reckon any coach in the AFL would know exactly what goes on among the fitness blokes. Ross Lyon, for example, and I'm not implicating him in any dodgy business, but when players are injured, Ross Lyon doesn't even want to know about him. He says, don't even talk to me about this bloke until the doctor comes to me or the physio comes to me and says he's right to go. I'm only interested in the players I have at my disposal. So how's a senior coach supposed to know, this guy's being injected BC 612 composite. You know, like, I don't know about you guys, but it's the list catalogue of drugs now. I feel like I'm studying for a pharmacology degree every time I read one of his stories. So I'm half forgetting what the question was now, but I mean, look, clubs in that sense have got really big. So perhaps one lesson, I think one lesson will definitely come out of it, is that there has to be, and I hate using this phrase, better corporate governance. And they will have to become, even the football departments of clubs, more like, you know, corporations in terms of HR policies and who looks after who, and everything needs to be covered off on. So there's a lot of lessons out of the Essendon thing, but I don't look at Essendon and say, oh, you guys have been dodgy. I look at Essendon and go, you guys have been really naive, and there's a massive difference.
How likely, sorry Ethan, how likely are we to see this issue resolved during the season, or is it something that they're going to try and push out to the end of the season to sort of let Essendon have the best chance possible at having a good season?
I don't think anyone's got the faintest idea, and yeah, it's again really good question, because I've thought that a lot. I mean, you know, what if Essendon, not that they will, but what if Essendon's up near the top of the ladder, you know, halfway through the year, and then they say, okay, here is the definitive. What do they do then from a competition point of view? You know, do they strip them of points? Do they kick them out of this year's comp? And there are so many logistical issues with that. I tend to think that what you hinted at before might be the case. They might sort of not put it on the back burner, but just sort of make sure that this is addressed come October. Because, I mean, the season's about to start. Can you think of a bigger, you know, sort of tragedy for the competition if, you know, 3 or 4 weeks into a new season, suddenly one team gets kicked out? I mean, even, you know, the Melbourne Storm and the NRL, they were stripped of premiership points, but it was all in place before the season started. And once we start next week, there's not much room for manoeuvre until it all ends at the end of September.
I think that makes it a positive that the AFL's taken over the ASADA punishment, it's unlikely that we'll probably see punishments handed out during the course of the season. The AFL will take action probably at the end of the year if the investigation's found to be guilty or not guilty or whatever happens from that.
Yeah, and there'll be plenty of cynicism about that, as there often is about a lot of AFL decisions, but just in a practical sense, I think that has to be the best way to go, doesn't it?
Yeah, probably. And also for the players as well. They don't want to get to June hitting really good form, so, well, I don't want to name names, of course, but you get players that are in hot form during, say, June, July, and all of a sudden they got a punishment hanging over their backs and they're not able to play footy for the rest of the year. That'd be absolutely tragic for them.
Well, with Essendon players, they usually fall off at around June, don't they? So
yeah, June. I think the last time they won a game in June was about 2000. So
yeah, not good.
Yeah, we're going to look at the team previews for season 2013. Just look at how every team shapes up. I think we go from bottom to top from last year's ladle. Start with GWS now. I thought they were quite impressive last year. I think we can unanimously agree with that. Well, for their standards, being a bunch of kids and a bunch of 30-year-olds, yeah, for a team that won 2 games, they were quite impressive. And I think we can naturally agree that they'll improve come season 2013. And well, the stats pretty much show where they're at. The percentage of 46 and third last in disposals and contested disposals and all that. So I think they're ahead of Gold Coast at the same stage.
Yeah, I think that's the major debate at the moment, is whether Gold Coast is going to slip behind GWS in terms of development. I'm not necessarily sold on that. I think looking at initial team lists, just sort of look at GWS and say, oh yeah, they've got the better overall team list if you look at it. But
they're still 19.
But yeah, that's it. They're only in their second year of and you know, a modern team coming into the modern game with a completely new team, teaching, you know, 2 or 3 kids per year to learn the game in a top level team is hard enough to teach. You know, 15 odd players that'll be rotated in and out of the squad over the year is a whole nother thing. So look, it's sort of a bit misleading looking at GWS's list at the moment. Of course, I think it's pretty easy to say they're going to be a champion team soon, but definitely not this year. I think anything, if they were to manage 4 wins this year, that would be huge.
I think the AFL look at GWS and be loving this. They're the most fated wooden spoon team in league history. I mean, everyone talks them up, and me too. I mean, the key to them for me is Patton and Cameron. They sort of loom as a 10-year key forward duo, I think, provided they're not lured somewhere else, and that'll be a bit of an issue. Toby Green's another pretty impressive player for them. I didn't see a lot of them last year, to be honest, but when I did see them Green really stood out to me.
Well, it's average 28 disposals a game in your first year is unheard of.
It's not bad, it's not bad. And I guess the other thing I noticed was the young guys just seemed a bit more physically prepared than, say, the Gold Coast kids were in their first year. So, again, I think they'll finish bottom, but it's a bottom with an asterisk because you can see there's clearly a very bright future for them.
Well, it's going from 100% bottom to probably 85% bottom of the ladder, so I think there's going to be noticeable improvement, and get your percentage up to about 60, 65, and win an extra couple of games and you'll be right. And Gold Coast, on the other hand, looking to win 6 games last year and only won half that percentage of 60, of course, and they didn't look to improve so much on their first season as much as we expected them to. The rise of players like Caddy, who's now gone, and look, their goal kickers, there's not very many goal kickers there as well. Yeah, again, Caddy with 15 was 4th, and Brown, who's how old's Brown? Is he 29 or 30 now? So
old enough.
Old enough. And then you got midfielders and Ablett Bennell leading the way. So there's no score there. The midfield was losing clearances way more often than not, and it's hard to see where they're going to finish. I mean, of course, again, you expect natural improvement with the kids, but you just got to wonder how much that's going to come and where it's going to take them for season 2013.
Definitely bottom 4, though. We can definitely say definitely bottom 4, and anybody who wants to say elsewise would be putting their neck on the line, I think. But
the word I've heard about them is they've had a particularly good pre-season in terms of physical conditioning and strength. So they're a bit. I think they're a bit. The coaching staff are a bit disappointed at their failure to sort of run games out. So they poured a lot of work into them, and just that first round NAB Cup game or games, I thought you could see that they did look a bit stronger. I think there'll be a bit more emphasis on their defensive football because that's been a real shortfall for them. But again, like GWS, I mean, we're venturing into the unknown a bit here. We've never had we have had new sides before, but new sides that are almost like junior sides playing against senior opposition. So in some ways it's very hard to put a line through it, but I think they'll improve on last year. And again, like GWS, I think I've got them, the bottom 2, but, the curve is definitely up.
Onto the more established teams now, Melbourne, who were quite disappointing, we can agree, from last season. Probably didn't expect them to drop as much as they did, and for the first few rounds they just looked quite shaky. They lacked any spread whatsoever, and their midfield was, bar Nathan Jones, quite disappointing. And you got to wonder, Mark Neeld spoke recently that he knows it's a tough road ahead and it's a long way to go before Melbourne will probably be up there once again, and you got to wonder where the improvement's got to come from as well. I mean, you got the natural inclusions of Jack Viney and David Roden, who will probably offer some immediate help in the midfield, and that's where the issue lies for me. You've got last in uncontested disposals as well, and contested disposals was third last, so they're just struggling in that department. And I think that's if they improve them there, you got goal kickers in Mitch Clark and Chris Dawes, so I think once you get it down there, they do have the ability to kick goals.
I think for a team that's lost 2 of its most important players, or at least in yesteryear, that being Jared Rivers and Brent Maloney.
Not of yesteryear, Brent Maloney.
No, Brent Maloney's still a good player, but
2011 Brent Maloney, definitely.
That's it, definitely. But for a team that's lost 2 pretty prominent players, I think they're still a side that's on the up. They're not going to go backwards, I suppose. It's not too hard to go up from where they've been, but I don't think they're going to go backwards. I think the acquisition of Chris Dawes is actually really underrated. I think Dawes definitely suffered last year, obviously, and you can just have a look at all of his outputs throughout the season. But, a fresh club can do crazy things to a player that's not in good form. He hasn't been super in the NAB Cup from what I've seen of Melbourne.
He's had a bit of hamstring tightness.
Yeah, well, that certainly doesn't help then. But he hasn't been great this pre-season so far. But look, I mean, most people have him kicking under 20 goals, and you've got to consider he's going to be their number 2 target every single time going forward.
Clark could probably play up the ground. You have Dawes sitting in the goal square every game.
I think the biggest impact of those guys from the other clubs might well be off the field, around the club and in preparation terms, and that's...
Well, you have Dawes and Burns straight into the leadership group. I think that says something about the way they've approached the new clubs.
Yeah, absolutely, and Roden as well. They're really good clubmen, and I think that, you talk to people at Melbourne, that's that sort of lack of leadership around the club, not just on the field, has been a massive issue. So you fix that up, and you see better examples set for the younger guys, even the captains, Trengove and Grimes, and I think it can be turned around quickly. They look stronger to me up forward now I like the idea of Clark and Dawes playing as a forward tandem. Howe's a good sort of third target almost. And in terms of midfield, that's definitely a huge issue because they just don't have enough of them. But Viney, impressed with what I've seen of him, and the one I'm really impressed with is Jimmy Toumpas. I just love saying that name, Jimmy Toumpas, but I saw him play in the Sandford Grand Final in 2011 when he was too young to even be drafted. And he was just a gun. And
he kicked a late goal to win the match.
Yeah. And I was at that NAB Cup game. It was, who was it? Them, Richmond and North Melbourne, wasn't it? And he just looks really composed. It's not often you see a kid that inexperienced and that young looks so composed on the footy field, and that's a legacy of having played senior football against fully formed men for 2 years already. So I think he'll have an immediate difference. I think Melbourne will improve. I reckon they win 4 games last year. I could see them winning up to 8 or 9 this year, which isn't a final spot, but
it's not bottom 4.
It's a big improvement on where they were last year.
Western Bulldogs now, I think we mostly had them going the opposite direction to that, unfortunately. Players like, they've got a few acquisitions. They got Kobe Stevens should have an immediate jump into the centre circle. Nick Lower as well as an experienced player is probably harshly cut from Fremantle, I would have thought. But
and Brett Goods as well.
And Brett Goods as well, who's he should step right into their round 1 side. But the key position stocks is where they've been let down more so recently. Jordan Roughhead, he's been good in a key position spot, but he needs help down there.
Liam Jones has been fantastic this pre-season from what I've seen, though. As far as players that are really going to jump out of the blocks that you might not expect, I think Liam Jones would probably top that list. But with that said, really, you look at the forward line, and last year their top goal scorer was Gian Siracusa with 30-something goals. And
it was less than that, it was 29, I think.
There you go. You're just not going to win games with that. So unless, Jones is going to kick 40, 50 goals, which you think would be pretty much of a stretch for a player that's going to come into form for his first season with no support around him, you can't see the Dogs finishing anywhere else but the bottom 4.
No, I agree. I get this feeling of deja vu about the Dogs every year because I sit down to do my preview and I seem to write, I reckon it's 3 years in a row now, right? The Dogs really need rapid improvement from their tools, Grant, Jones and Cordy. You say it every year and yet we don't see enough of it. They don't look, none of them, to me, look sort of physically strong enough to compete as key forward targets. Roughhead's been an interesting one because he seems to have now turned the corner. Midfield's another looming issue for them because it's always been very dependent on Cross and Boyd. They're getting towards the end.
As well.
And Griffin. And Griffin, he's like the last remaining, for me, symbol of the old skillful Bulldogs. So when I look at the Bulldogs, I see a terribly unskilled team, which was interesting that they recruited, we're talking about recruits, Tom Young from Collingwood. He's a goer, but there's big questions about his disposal.
And Kobe
Stevens will be a good acquisition.
And same Lower, but I don't look at any of them and think, gee, they're going to turn this club into a looming powerhouse. And the one guy who they've really sort of pumped up in the last 2 years, Dalhouse, he was originally off the rookie list. So you look at the Bulldogs now and wonder about their recruiting over the last 5 or 6 years. It's going to be a long haul for them, but Brendan McCartney's a very as patient as he can be as a coach. His reputation is a terrific teaching coach. So if anyone can get improvement out of these guys, he can. But it's got to be sort of last chance for those young tools, because if they don't click this year, I think they've got to just cut their losses and look elsewhere. So yeah, look, where have I got them? I've got them about 4th bottom, I think.
And above them was Port Adelaide, of course, and I'm actually really liking the way they're going with their midfield, especially. They got some pretty impressive young players. Brad Ebert was a fantastic recruit last season. Matthew Broadbent stepped up fantastically, and I'm really liking the way they're going about their footy. And Ken Hinkley as well is a good coach. He's been in the line for a few senior coaching roles as well, and I reckon they've got a pretty good year ahead of them. Probably not finals. I think we can agree.
Oh, no.
That they're
Not
not
finals,
final side.
maybe not ladder position, but I think they're going to be one of the huge improvers this year, just in terms of game style and general enjoyableness to watch. Like they just have so many good young kids coming through, and they've recruited really well and traded really well, in my opinion.
Well, their best recruit's been the coach, I think. You know, I mean, they're, really solid football person, plenty of experience as an assistant. From what I hear, the players have really responded to very specific instruction. That's been a bit of an issue. They've just sort of, you know, there's been nothing. They've become in the last few years a terribly anonymous club. You know, like I'd look at Port play and I'd think, okay, there's a lot of guys called Stewart and Thomas, but I don't actually know any of them. And now you're sort of starting to get a bit of a sense of who they are as a team. In terms of future talent, the guy I really like is Hartlett. You know, he looks a real class act, and I think he could be a big part of their future. I still don't think the natural talent is there, but I think you'll see a more sort of definitive game plan. You know, I think they'll toughen up a bit too, and that should enable them to win more games than they did last year. Still, you know, a bottom 5 side for me this year, but the future isn't as bad as it was looking a year ago.
Yeah, I think I might be a bit alone when I say that I don't really see the future of Port Adelaide looking at the team.
Yeah, I've had them pretty low on my ladder as well.
Structure's one thing, but if you don't have the players that are able to carry out the structure, then it's a completely different story. I think, as we've mentioned, the coaching has been good and the players have responded, but if the talent's not there, then, you know, you're going to struggle. I mean, we've got Boak was obviously a big name to keep, and then who's your next best midfielder would be Kasisi, and he's been
that'd be Ebert, I would say.
Or Ebert, excuse me, and then probably Kasisi, and that's looking at as far as top 3 midfield leaders go, that's not too flash in my opinion, and it doesn't get a whole lot.
You can say the same of any bottom 6, 7 side.
You could, but I think when you look at the best 3 midfielders of every team in the bottom 4 or 5 teams, they've all got an upside. I mean, Bulldogs, you've got Boyd, Cross, Griffin, as we mentioned. Even GWS, we've got the guys that they brought over in their inception. Gold Coast, obviously, you're led by Ablett, and it gets a little bit better from there after a little bit, you know,
thin.
Yeah, a little bit thin after that. But Port Adelaide, I just don't see that. There seems to be a lack of leadership in my opinion, but that might just be me.
Well, you've got Broadbent, and I think he's a quite underrated player. A lot of people think, oh, who's this guy? He's a dud. But in my opinion, he's showed a lot of improvement over the last year or so.
Well, it was 20 disposals and a goal a game last year. That's not bad.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a few years until we actually see their midfield come on. As you say, they're reliant on Boak and Kasisi, but they've got the likes of Wingard in there as well. To come on and Quadzilla, they call him.
Quadzilla this year.
Ollie Wines. He's torn it up in the pre-season so far, so I think it might be at least a couple of seasons yet until we see them come on.
But I think the upside is there. Next up was
Brisbane. Yes. So
yeah, we talked about Brisbane a bit off the top. Sorry to cut in there, Ash. We talked about Brisbane a bit off the top. General consensus. See, this is the fun thing for me, is that the general consensus seems to be it's either top 8 or bust for Michael Voss. Whereas, you know, especially definitely in the pre-season, there's been a lot of talk of if they're not challenging for top 8, then he's gone, which is obviously a bit harsh, seeing as now they've won the pre-season competition. But yeah.
Well, they've got a relatively balanced draw. They've played GWS, Melbourne, and Bulldogs twice. So
you can almost book that in for 6 wins straight away.
Well, we don't know about Melbourne because if they're going to improve, but anyway, that's just further discussion. But they've got a relatively balanced draw. In the trade and draft period, they got a really good grab in Brent Maloney and also Stefan Martin, which will just add to... Stefan Martin. Sorry.
Maloney played really well in the NAB Cup Grand Final as well. He was one of the contenders to be to win the medal, I think.
Well, he had 6 clearances in the first quarter, which is on record pace. So I think the clearances were probably where they struggled a bit last season, even with their impressive young midfield. So I think having him in there directly winning the clearances, as well as Simon Black, who's been fantastic for years, and he's still got a role to play. So I think that's where the improvement's going to come from, and I think that's where they're going to shoot up the ladder.
Well, in the draft and the trade period, they didn't really focus on one position. They sort of just looked at all different positions around the ground, and they got players that would assist in those areas. So
thrift shopping. They did a bit of thrift shopping. They went out and they got the basement players from other clubs, and they're sort of doing the Sydney approach, I think. And so far, from what we've seen in the pre-season, it's working.
Seems to be working, yeah.
Sorry, I've got to chip in there. Was that a sort of reference to the Triple J?
Maybe.
Can I just say, and I'm revealing my age here, that is close to the worst song I reckon I've ever heard. I sat down and I thought, I've got to familiarise myself with the Hottest 100, and I heard that and I just said, you are kidding, it's got to be a joke.
No,
anyway.
It's just the big piss take and taking the piss out of hipsters, basically.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Okay, anyway, sorry, I digress, go on.
That's okay. So last year they weren't particularly good in tackling. They were ranked 5th in tackles per game, so they're not really applying pressure in that area, but they were ranked 14th in the number of goals per game. So... oh wait, that was a good score. Wait, I did it backwards. They were ranked 5th in tackles, so that's good that they were applying the pressure. They were ranked 14th in number of goals per game, so they're not very high scoring, but hopefully this year they can sort of focus on getting some more scoreboard.
You had Brown out a bit last year, so I don't know if that helped.
That
With
probably.
a destroyed face. Just the machine.
Hit by a car.
There you go, hit by a
wrecked
car.
the car.
Yeah. I like the way, I mean, we talked about Brisbane earlier, but one thing I like about them is the way, only a couple of years ago we were saying it still hangs around the veterans, and Brown is obviously crucial and he kicked 5 last night, but I don't think it lives or dies now on Jonathan Brown and Simon Black particularly playing well every week. In fact, Simon Black now will be sort of cream on the cake almost, and they've set up, Rich, Red and Rockcliffe now are, I think, relatively senior for them, and then there's this raft of guys below them Zorko, Beams, Green up. I really like Green.
Yeah.
He's just got a real bit of magic about him, I think. So the young talent is there, and it'll be fashionable now to sort of jump on their bandwagon, but you really can see them, even post the retirement of Brown and Black, being a good side for a few years. So in terms of Voss's job, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because there's only 2 coaches coming out of contract this year. He's one of them. But I think, it's sort of weighing up. I really blamed him for the trade debacles of the end of 2009. However, I think given where they were, he's responded really well and couldn't have done a lot more. So where does that leave him in contractual terms? I'm not sure that there'll be that much obvious coaching talent there to replace him. So I wouldn't be surprised if he stayed on, even if they didn't make the 8, to be honest.
They would need to improve, maybe like 10th or something like that.
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, though, they finished 13th with 10 wins, which I'm pretty sure hasn't been done previously. So it was a good 13th. The bottom half of the ladder's fantastic these days, isn't it? We're raving about 18th and 17th. 13th's never been better.
Right.
Everyone's great. That was sarcasm, but don't worry.
Speaking about Zorko really quickly and Black in his role, he had an interview after the game and he really praised Simon Black and how he's really, elevated him to the next level, and it really shows that, the presence of someone like Black, even as a playing coach, which basically he is right now, how much benefit that does for the youngsters, and you'd think that he would go right into coaching even straight after he retires. Yeah,
it's funny to say it of a Brownlow medalist, but there's still this thing for me that Black is a little bit underrated in terms of where he stands in the greats of the game, and part of that's because he's an interstate club. I think part of that's because he's a hard player without necessarily looking like a hard player. And look, people might laugh, but I think the women going weak at the knees factor has sort of worked against him, because it means that they're always you're always hearing about, Simon Black, isn't he great, without necessarily hearing he's a really hard, tough, contested player. And clearly one with a great footy brain. So, look, to be able to have a guy who's still playing as almost a de facto coach, like you say, it's a wonderful bonus for them.
Yep.
Now moving on to Richmond, who finished 12th in 2012. They seem to have a relatively tough draw in the middle of the season, but the rest of the season seems to be pretty balanced. So if they can get through that patch, they should be okay. In the trade and draft period, they gained Troy Chaplin, and that's a really good grab because he can become a key defender. Matt Joyce has just put on his tiger hat.
That looks ridiculous.
I got it in San Francisco. It's the greatest hat I've ever had.
It's got attached mittens to it. Okay, anyway. In the draft, they picked up, and I can't say his name, Nick Vlaston. who's a defender and midfielder, so he can also help with Richmond's defence issue. And so in the draft and the trade period, they focused on the problematic defence, and they seem to have fixed it, so hopefully that will sort of resolve itself. Last year they were ranked high in kicks, handballs and disposals, so it's clear that the midfield's very good at carrying the ball and moving the ball around. However, they were ranked 17th in tackles, which means that they weren't really applying enough pressure from that point of view. Person to watch that everyone seems to be saying is Dustin Martin. Should be on the up from last year's sort of...
Yeah, he should. He's been a great standout in the pre-season, and Mark Williams coming over from GWS, really taking him under his wing and basically giving him a lot of basically a kick up the arse to say, you know, really, this is what you need to do to be an AFL footballer. So I know it's hard to keep your face straight with me wearing this hat, but I need to put on my Richmond hat when I talk about Richmond.
There's a really bad joke to be had there when you said it should be on the up, because some people would say it should be on the up because he won't be on the uppers, but I didn't actually say that. Yeah. Tigers, like I've got them 9th, you know, which everyone thinks is a joke, but I mean I really think they're coming, and I just couldn't squeeze them in above the other teams, but clearly they think their time is now, because they've now got, I think, 9 players from other clubs on their list, which is second most behind only Sydney, I think. And I like the guys they've picked up. Chaplin is a key defender, but he's also a very good playmaker in the way that Matthew Scarlett was for Geelong. So I think he can really, and a really good leader as well. So I think he can fill a role for them. Chris Knight's really talented player who's almost a bit of a forgotten man. And then you got those guys on the rookie list, you know, who all of whom I think will play a role at some stage. You know, Pettard's looked all right in the NAB Cup. Stevenson, you know, he's not a champion, but he can adequately fill a ruck hole if one looms. And Sam Lonergan, same, you know, like, I don't necessarily see Lonergan as a class act, but he's certainly a good clearance winner, and there'll be times during the year when even a midfielder as good as theirs will probably get a little bit stretched. So they're definitely coming. You know, Aaron Edwards is another interesting one, isn't he? Because, you know, you're talking about people sort of misbehaving off the field. He puts Dustin Martin to shame in that regard almost. But he's a talented player, and he just hasn't been able to have consistency. But just a little bit of that would be support for Rewalt. And then, you know, the silk around the midfield of Martin, Cochin, and the other one, Deledio. And then you see Foley's a good one.
And
you know,
Puck
like
as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Puck had celiac disease and he never knew about it. So he's just from switching to a gluten-free diet, he's improved, he thinks, 10% in his opinion, and he was already, you know, very good.
Still wears that funny stuff on his ears, though.
Yeah, it's some weird.
I've never worked out what that was about.
Can't get water in his ears, that's the problem.
Okay.
But the one thing I think we should quickly know about Richmond is 17th in tackles for the league. I think that's the one deficiency they have in the midfield. They have so many fantastic offensive players in Deledio, Koch and Tuck and Martin, but the defensive players aren't there. They don't have a specific tagger, I don't think. I think
they used to have Jackson, but for some reason they keep playing him as a forward and a loose wingman when he doesn't have the disposal efficiency to do it. So he was taking really good scalps in 2009, but I have no idea why he doesn't.
I think Richmond's going to be the victim as far as that log jam in the middle of the ladder. Mostly because, as Ash mentioned, there's that patch of really tough games in the middle of the season. That's going to be make or break. If they win the majority of them, you'll probably see them sneak in top 8. If they lose the majority of them, they'll probably miss out. As we can sort of see, there's that logjam in the middle of teams that are either trying to press for a top 8 spot, or they're just coming down from being a top 4 team. So obviously, you know, 12 odd teams can't go into 8. And as far as the draw goes, I do think Richmond's probably going to suffer as a result of that. But they will benefit from a lot of the players that they've picked up in the long term. You know, you don't see Richmond sliding next year or the year after. They're only going to go up from here. So.
Yeah, and I know, Rohan, you made Richmond 9th on your ladder, which is an improvement from, I think, 13th what you had last year.
The fact that you remember that really worries me, because I haven't got a clue.
I remember these things.
He doesn't forget. He holds a grudge.
I never forget. I'm like an elephant.
Woke up in a cold sweat.
An elephant with a dog hat on.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this I Heart Richmond sticker that I got from my membership pack. So when we are in the top 4, you can jump on the bandwagon. You could jump on the bandwagon and it'd be an honorary Richmond man.
I'll wear it with pride.
All right.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm collecting a real trophy cabinet full of things from all the clubs. You know, I actually did a Carlton practice game, an intra-club game for the Carlton website, and I let someone stupidly take a shot at me wearing a Carlton team thing, and I've been given grief about it ever since. And a few years ago, I infamously allowed myself to be photographed wearing a Collingwood jumper, and the Essendon fans still hate me as a result. So now they can hate me for loving Richmond as well. So
just stick it on your phone and it'll be good.
I'll wear it with pride.
One quick question, how well does it microwave?
Not that well, actually. Rubber doesn't do it that well, or plastic, whatever it's made of.
Moving on to the next team on the ladder.
Yeah, so Essendon finished 11th last season. This year they seem to have a pretty balanced draw. You'd probably forgotten about Essendon just because of the issues that they've been having. You're thinking of them as a problem more than a team. But the trade and draft period, they did gain Brendan Goddard, which was a massive inclusion for them. He'll just add some versatility to their team. They also got the under the father-son rule, Joe Danaher, and he's a key forward, and he's a very talented figure. So
I don't think you can expect him to make much of an impact
not
this year.
But
maybe
you...
second half.
Maybe in the second half of the season, but not as a 18-year-old, 19-year-old.
Well, history over the last 4 or 5 years shows that that Essendon's win-loss ratio goes down considerably in the second half of the season. Obviously, last year was something completely unheard of, but yeah, look, I think it sort of comes down to a lot of it comes down to the role that Goddard will play. If he plays a inside midfielder role, I could see Essendon definitely being up there as far as top 8 contenders. If he does what he did at St Kilda for the last 2 years and sort of hangs out on the flank, well, as far as quality flankers go, Essendon have the best in the competition, so he'd definitely be wasted there.
And he was doing the latter in the pre-season as well. He wasn't winning very many clearances at all, let alone contested possessions, so it's going to be interesting to see where he plays throughout the year.
Well, I've got to say I'm of red and black persuasion, but I'm a little worried about this year. I look at the list and I sort of wonder where the improvement's going to come from, and they seem to still have the same problems to me. They still don't have enough quality midfielders, and a lot depends on Heppel and Zaharakis continuing to improve.
I think Heppel's going to get a lot more midfield time this year, and I think especially around the inside midfield.
Yeah, and obviously
it's where they're going to need someone to step up.
Yeah, and obviously Goddard's a massive inclusion, but even beyond that, you're always hearing a lot about Essendon's tall forwards or whatever, but how good are they? I mean, Gumbleton's perpetually injured. Hurley gets injured a lot, and the sort of reputation is almost better than the performance.
Hurley's not a forward, in my opinion. He's a backman. He's played a lot better in the back.
Yeah, well, I'm not as sort of rigid on that one, but I mean the fact that
he did have his run of 11 goals in 2 games.
The fact that they're still having a debate about it 3 years down the track is a worry, I think. Stewie Cramery isn't a key forward. He's definitely a sort of third tall type. I think we're still waiting for the likes of Jetta and Davey to find more consistency or win more of the ball. They don't get enough of the ball. I think the skills are still really wanting. That really fell apart last year as the injuries kicked in. And look, one I think guy who will improve and become a real quality ruckman is Tom Bell-Chambers. He's good material, Tom. He looked really good early last year. I think he's got another pre-season under his belt. He's strong, really good sort of ruck practitioner. So he'll make a difference. Where does that leave David Hill, though? And they always, to me,
probably
Essendon,
in the VFL.
Well, maybe. To me, Essendon always seems to be applying band-aids sort of left, right and centre and sort of hoping things are going to work out. So I looked at them, and early last year you would have thought, gee, they're 8-1 were they? But I think you looked in retrospect and sort of think they had some easy opponents. I just think there's too many other teams who are better than them, to be honest. So I think in the end I'll put them about 10th or 11th.
I think as far as ruck stocks, as you slightly mentioned before, if Bell-Chambers can sort of step up, then that sort of allows Ryder to be that answer to that forward target, sort of play a Jared Roughhead type role of recent years. He has spent a lot of time in the forward line, Ryder, this pre-season, and as far as his overhead grab goes, he'd probably be one of the best demonstrations going around the competition at the moment, at least early in the year. So that's certainly an option. As far as David Hill goes, you pretty much think he's on the way out. So I think it's important that Bellchambers does step up, but there still is that level of inconsistency in the midfield. I think that's sort of what sets them apart from the other teams challenging for the 8.
Yeah, Ryder's a good example because, I think they want to make him a marquee player, but he's never been able to have enough consistency about his football to do that. And big year for him. I mean, he really needs to stand up, take the ball by the horns and play well every week. History says he is incapable of doing that. So, now's the time for him. I mean, you're talking about a bloke who, I think this might be his 8th season, so the time for, Paddy Ryder has potential talks way past, and like a lot of his teammates, he's got a fire now.
Now who came 10th last year was Carlton. So in 2013, their first month is really tough. They face Richmond, Collingwood, Geelong, West Coast in Subiaco.
So they're going to be 1-0, you'd think. The way Richmond go in the first round every year.
We'll see.
They're due to win one, which, we'll see. But they face Richmond, Collingwood, Geelong, West Coast at Subiaco and Adelaide. That's in Melbourne, but that's their first sort of month and a bit. Other than that, their draw's pretty balanced as well. In trade week, they weren't really visible. They were pretty invisible, actually. But in the draft period, they managed to pick up Menzel, who was seen to be a steal because he was meant to go a bit higher. And they also picked up Nick Graham. But they did need key position players, and they haven't really gotten any. So this will come back. Could this come back to bite them? We'll sort of see during the season. Their good stat for last year was that they were ranked 4th in tackles per game, so that they're playing highly contested footy. But they were ranked 13th in handballs per game, so they need to sort of work on that in the midfield. We've got to sort of watch the whole team because they've got to adapt to mixed boundary style of playing the game. And also the person that they've been saying is going to have a breakout season again is Bryce Gibbs because he really needs to step up. And Malthouse might play him in the midfield where he traditionally plays.
He will play in the midfield. Yeah. He definitely will. As far as your midfield locks go, I think you've got Murphy and Gibbs in there every single day. Malthouse has really prepared Gibbs for that role as well, and that's something Ratton didn't really do in yesteryear, is give Gibbs the chance to play in the pre-season, mostly in the midfield.
Yeah, look, I've actually seen a bit of their pre-season. I did both their intra-club games, and I've watched them in the NAB Cup, and I think they're on the right track. And I think the big difference between them and Brisbane was mainly that of physical preparation. You mentioned key position forwards, and it's an interesting one. We seem to say it all revolves around Jared Wade. I'm not sure that's so much the case now as it used to be. I really like the look of Levi Casbolt. I think
it's quite hard to rely on Wade when he only plays 10 games a year.
Yeah, well, that's in fact a good point. I think in his last 8 years he's never played more than a dozen every season. So, I mean, that would be sort of cream on the cake. But Casbolt to me looks pretty impressive. Cruiser again will be an interesting one because I think from what I gather. And Hampson struggled last night, didn't he? But I think Cruiser, they see him more as really a forward than a ruckman, even though he's played some good footy in the ruck. So a key to it, we seem to say it a bit, could be Robbie Warnock. I saw him play in those intra-club games, and he was really impressive until he got injured. Now, injury's been an issue for him as well. So there's a lot of ifs and buts about it. But if they get a couple of key position forwards to stand up, I think that makes Betts, Garlett, etc. more dangerous still.
There's no shortage of key forwards either. There's still Mitchell and Rowe as well, who are not yet proven, but they're still quality footballers, and you'd think that they could have some sort of impact this year. Yeah,
no, well, Rowe particularly, again, he stood out in those practice games I was at. Defence is an interesting one too, because the guy, I think, they commonly agree now, the guy they really missed last year was Laidler, who's, just a very good sort of, almost quarterback, if you like. He's a real sort of general down there in terms of playmaking. Henderson, I think, proved himself now to be pretty reasonable key defenders, likewise Jamison. So I think the material's there. I think, if anything, Carlton's biggest problem's been upstairs in the head, not getting sliced apart as quickly as they did last year. And Malthouse, historically, is very good at toughening teams up mentally. He's very good also at getting the lower players on the list to get the absolute best out of themselves, which I think would make a difference to the Blues. It wouldn't be so star-dependent. And then, there'd be more to Carlton we'd be talking about other than, Judd, Murphy, Gibbs.
The big evidence of that, in my opinion, was Jared Blair at the Collingwood Football Club. At the time, he was there with Medhurst, and Medhurst is clearly the better player in terms of skills and that sort of thing, but Blair really, listened to Malthouse and adhered perfectly to the game plan, and he's wearing a premiership medallion now from 2010, so I think Malthouse is very capable of doing that with Carlton's list.
If there's one player, so just on that example, if there's one player you can pick out from that, it would have to be Kane Lucas and then Space as far as midfield projects go. So far in the pre-season, he's been fantastic.
Armfield's been pretty good as well.
Armfield has been good, but he's still
Lucas
very
had
inconsistent.
30-odd disposals last
34
night.
disposals,
34.
which was game high as well. He's I don't think he's had a pre-season hit out where he hasn't had 20-plus disposals. So, he's definitely, as you sort of likened him to Blair a little bit before, he'd definitely be the Blair of Carlton as far as Malthouse goes at Carlton. But yeah, I think it certainly comes down to the way the forward line shapes up for Carlton. If they can work out where Cruz is going to play, if they can teach Hampson how to mark, if they can get Rowe, Casbolt, Mitchell in there and find somebody, not have them rotating in and out of the squad, because the best teams are the teams that have their spine playing, every single game of the year, picked first. Carlton don't have that at the moment with their forwards. As soon as that gets worked out, I think that's when Carlton will be a dangerous team.
Okay, now look at St Kilda, who came 9th last season. Their draw is a bit tough. They have a lot of games interstate. They have 6, including the New Zealand one, and that I'm very interested to see how Sydney and St Kilda recover from the New Zealand travel. I can't see it really. Also, trade and draft period for them. They lost Brendan Goddard, and he was in the top 10 in 2012 for disposals, marks, inside 50s, intercepts, and he was integral for score assists. So he really needs to be covered, and it'll be interesting to see if they can recover from him. Sorry. Also, they picked up Tom Hickey as a handy ruck inclusion, and in the draft they focused on forwards and defenders, so they've got a bit of versatility through that. In 2012, they were ranked 2nd in the number of goals per game, so it proves that they have a high-scoring game plan, and they were ranked 17th in hit-outs per game, so they need to resurrect their ruck issue. I think the people that we have to watch is the young talent, especially people like Jack Stephen, Armitage, Stanley. Thoughts?
Could be overstating the travel factor there. It's only 4 hours it's the same as a plane trip to Perth, isn't it?
That's a media beat-up, I'm sorry. The interstate travelling is a complete media build-up by outlets trying to sort of, find excuses or maybe hype up a game. Or
depends who they fly with. On-air entertainment, that's what I think. Put them off the game.
I think the AFL, I think their carrier's Virgin now, so I don't know what, if Virgin's better than Qantas, or it's certainly better than Jetstar, I can tell you that, having flown both recently.
Well, at least it's not Tiger.
Saints are on the way down, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Too old, that's it. And they've got the young kids coming through, but there's not enough, and
they haven't given them enough games.
No, not at all. You'd think, having retained Kazitsky, he'll still start. He needed to go last year, in my opinion, if they were going to be serious about redevelopment. You can either, as far as redevelopment goes, you can either bite the bullet and say, righto, we're not going to be playing finals anymore, let's bottom out for a couple of years, just like West Coast did. They realised they weren't going to play finals for a while, they bombed out for 1 year, and all of a sudden they're a top 4 team.
St Kilda was with half their side out,
I suppose so, but yes, St Kilda still was in a similar position. I believe they could have cut their losses and said, righto, let's reshape the list. Decided to retain some of those names that they really needed to get rid of.
Yeah, surely you would get rid of Kazitsky and play someone more consistently like Reece Stanley,
or
give games to Tom Lee as well, who they picked up from trading with GWS.
Stanley's been training down back this season, so I think that's where they've envisaged him for the long term.
Just on that thing about bottoming out, I think St Kilda see themselves as a potential Sydney, which might be sort of overstating their claims a bit, but I think Sydney's given clubs hope that you don't have to throw it all away and go down the bottom of the ladder for 2 or 3 years. Now, the key there is they're in a difficult position. Waters is in a difficult position because the older guys are still the drivers of that side. They are trying to bring younger guys in now, but I don't think you can allow any club now to just sort of put their hands up for 2 or 3 years and say, okay, we're not going to be competitive. So they think just by adding sort of bits to the equation, hopefully the young guys get good enough by the time all the old guys are gone to, this is very wordy, isn't it,
yeah,
to facilitate the generational changeover. But I think they got plenty out of last year. You know, Malera was impressive, Sard was impressive, Simkin was impressive. Just in the pickups too, I'm not sure if you mentioned Trent Dennis-Lane. You know, he's quite a talented, you know, sort of goal sneak type. So I'm sort of in two minds about the Saints, but I can see them being nuisance value, but I couldn't see them making the 8.
Right. And Lenny Hayes, everyone loves Lenny, so they're just going to...
Yeah, but is he ever going to have it, you know...
He'll play the Simon Black role, in my opinion.
Can he have as good a season as he had last year at his age? You know, I mean, you'd suspect not.
Yeah. Moving on to the top 8 from 2012, start with North Melbourne. In my opinion, one of the teams that should drop out of the top 8, just due to, you know, a much harsher draw than they had in 2012, as well as still a relatively young list that's quite reliant on players like Petrie. Petrie's going to have a huge year if they're going to make the 8 again, in my opinion. And really this year is sort of like a learning year, a year for the young midfield and backline to gel together. But in 2014 onwards, I really see them being a significant threat, especially with Luke McDonald to come in the 2013 draft as a father-son selection. Should go in the first round. Utility, he looks like being a great player.
I think Richmond and North Melbourne are very much alike in the same situation at the moment, whereas they've got relatively young midfielders that are very good performers, but they haven't necessarily got the players around them to sort of to make them a really damaging team. As far as midfields go, North Melbourne have got, in my opinion, the second best young midfield in the competition, so in a couple of years they're going to be very dangerous. But as you mentioned, Joyce, they've still got that over-reliance on Petrie, which is fine at the moment, seeing as he's still in form and he can still play. But what happens when he isn't in form? What happens when he can't play? What happens in that situation? Are the next two going to step up, or are we going to see them sort of have the same similar 20, 30 goal output they're having at the moment?
They've got Robbie Tarrant and Lockie Hansen coming through, which they're all right. I mean,
Aaron Black's looked all right as well.
Aaron Black has looked really good, one of the big improvers of the pre-season.
You'd suggest that one of them needs to step up this year, though, if as far as the future goes. You need one of them to kick 40 plus goals, 50 plus goals would be fantastic. If one of them kicks 50 plus goals and Petra kicks 50 plus goals, well, all of a sudden you're looking at them being a top 8 candidate.
I think one thing I like about them is that, you know, people talk about the North kids. They haven't all come in one hit. You know, you've got sort of Bassanak, Cunnington, Zeeble, they're sort of the midfield generals. But I think, you know, one really positive thing from last year was the emergence of Attlee, Harper, McMillan. So you've got 2 tiers in there. I'm big on this sort of layers of a side. You've got your veterans, you've got your mid-tier players, you've got your younger veterans, if you like, which, you know, Zeebel's been around a while now, and then the guys I talked about. But I agree, the over-reliance on Petrie, not the same reliance on Harvey now as they used to have, but he's still pretty important.
He's gone for the first 6 weeks as well.
Yeah, I think they can be a bit sort of fragile defensively at times, as in struggling to maintain monster key forwards. You know, do they have big enough sort of key defenders to do that? But the far and away the biggest factor for me with North this year is the draw, and it's a draw from hell. And you know, I did a statistical analysis of a draw, and I think I had them the second toughest behind Hawthorn. Now, fair enough in Hawthorn's case, but North scraped into the 8. They're sort of a mid-table team almost, so why did they get that tougher draw? And, you know, if anyone had a right to grumble about the draw this year, it was the Roos. So that, for me, when you look at their draw, that's enough to say they're going to struggle to make it.
And Petrie historically struggles against top 8 sides as well, especially compared to bottom 8 and bottom 10 and all that. So it's going to be interesting to see how he plays. Now, next up was Fremantle.
Yeah, my surprise packet for 2013. Like, we were speaking previously about how they could really be anything. I think Rohan had them 4th on his list there. in my opinion, I agree. They could be top 4, but depending on injuries, they could also miss the 8. In my opinion, if you get Pavlich out for a significant amount of time, or players like Monday and Fife and Hill, although with Hill and Pearce on opposite wings, it's going to be a deadly combination to have them, streaming down both wings. And with Sandilands, you don't have a lot of time left with him and Pavlich left in the game. You maybe got 2 or 3 years left with them, so you've got to really start planning for the succession. And Jonathan Griffin, performs admirably whenever he's forced when he gets to have a game when Sandilands is injured, and they're really grooming Zach Clark into that role as well. But it really gets to the point where if the season turns out not so well, if Pavlich gets injured, and will they tell Sandilands, look, mate, you've got to step aside and let the slightly younger brigade come through and get some experience, because you're not going to be around forever. I know he's quite highly paid in Sandilands, if I recall correctly, but I think there was something like clearance stats showed that Freo were a worse side clearance-wise if Sandilands was in the ruck, which was kind of weird to see. I'm not sure if opposition can read the taps quite well, or if he's really, if he telegraphs them obviously, or what happens. But it's definitely a odd side to see.
Ifs, ands or buts aside, Fremantle's list, if you look at it now, even with Sandilands out, is a top 8 team every single day of the week, especially if they come out with the same sort of form that they ended last year with. I mean, had they been playing the way that they finished last year, they would have been top 4 contenders by far, and they came, they sort of snuck into the 8 in the end, but they weren't necessarily expected to finish in the 8 at all, and then that last month or two, they just rocketed it in, and if they can do that from the start of the year, well, there's no reason to suggest why they can't be top 4 team.
Yeah, Matt hit it on the head there for me. You look at how a side finishes the year before, and they were all, behind. Sydney obviously finished really well.
North Melbourne finished really well as well.
Yeah, but there was just something very ominous about Fremantle. I mean, they had the defensive sort of foundations, and then they built up the offensive side, and it got to the stage where they went from being a side that couldn't score about halfway through the season to, in the last 6 or 7 weeks of the season, being a really potent side up forward. Now, you're right to say, if Pavlich goes down, that would be a real blow. I mean, they're very dependent upon him. I don't think they're as dependent on Sandilands as they used to be, so I think that's less of an issue. And you mentioned Griffin and Clark. I think they're both more than adequate. I like the mix of midfielders they've got. They've got sort of, a hard grinder in Mundy. Barlow's another one. Then they've got the dash. Fife could be absolutely anything. Hill, and you mentioned Pearce. I mean, Pearce to me could be one of the pickups of the year for them, because he just gives them that more outside run and further sort of makes an even balance between inside and outside. So, look, Pavlich kicks a lot of their goals. That's still some of an issue, but I think they can cultivate alternatives to him. But their defensive ethos is fantastic, and from what I hear, they've again done a lot of work pre-season on that. And Ross Lyon, to me, is the best coach in the caper. I look back on what he did with St Kilda, and he had that team within a kick of 2 consecutive premierships. And in terms of the talent of the whole list, they had no right to be there, I think. So he's an amazing coach. He's got more to work with here in terms of natural talent than he had at St Kilda. More of an offensive, sort of feel about Freo now, even than when he started. So they've had their getting to know you year, if you like, under him. I think they're ready to do really big things this year. Now, again, the if about injuries is a very valid one. I don't think their depth is as great as, say, West Coast. But really, you could say that with any side. If any side loses a couple of key players, they're going to be significantly weak. And I think you've got to assess it, all things being equal. And all things being equal, to me, they're a top 4 team.
I think just quickly mentioning that depth side of things, I think Pavlich they can cover, Sandilands they can cover. I think McFarlane they can't.
Yeah, no, it's a fair call. Yeah,
I think he's the same age as, of course, Pavlich as well. So I think if he starts to drop off and he starts getting to that age where your footy starts to diminish a little bit, I think they would struggle without him. Next up was Geelong.
Yeah, they've got a great mix of young and older cats, but they've got a lot of premiership players that have either recently retired or will be retiring soon. In the last 2 years, they've lost Ottens, Mooney, Milburn, Ling, Scarlett, Wajinski and Shannon Burns to a trade. But that's a significant list. That's a lot of premiership players. And, you know, you've got a lot of kids coming through. You know, Christensen, Duncan, Menzel. You know, great players. Metz, Hall and Smith.
We'll be here all day if you mention them.
But in terms of this year, they're either in the 8 or on the fringe. I've got them 9th on my list, especially compounded with the dire situation they've got with their rucks at the moment. You know, McIntosh has a knee injury, West has a knee injury, Vardy has a groin injury, Simpson has a back injury, so they're forced to play Mark Blitzers, who was a former Olympic steeplechaser, and you know, 198 centimetres. He's certainly got the height and the leap, certainly, to play in the ruck, but he's a second-year rookie. So, you know, for the first few rounds of the season, you know, you might see the Cats losing a few games that they might have otherwise won just due to inexperience from a ruckman, although he has performed quite admirably in the pre-season so far.
Geelong is my Sydney of 2005-2006 in as far as list development goes. Sydney never bottomed out when they had their grand finals, they won a premiership. I think the list now really resembles roughly the same makeup as Sydney had back then. I don't think Geelong's going to be a team that's going to be out of the top 8 for long. With that said, I don't think they're going to be a team that's in the top 4 for long, but in 5 or 6 years when those kids do develop, and the guys that are currently leading that midfield at the moment are in their twilight years, I think we might see them challenge for another premiership.
Yeah, look, they've been really impressive to me pre-season. I think one thing they've done that other great sides over a number of years haven't done is continue to develop the kids. I mean, Brisbane, you know, at the start of the millennium, I mean, they just went with what they had, went for broke, got the most out of it, and then they inevitably had to bottom out. Geelong has been very systematic about continuing to blood the kids, and we saw that like in 2010 when Menzel, Christensen, Duncan all came in, became part of a premiership side, or Menzel would have had he not been injured. We saw that last year as well. No premiership side has played more debutants than they did for 40 years, which is a really significant stat. And their kids are all good, you know. They seem to have a lot of these sort of little wispy, blonde-haired midfield types. I have trouble telling some of them apart, but, you know, there's plenty of them. I think losing Scarlett's a bit of an issue, though, no, it's more than a bit of an issue, but Jared Rivers can do that sort of playmaking role, if you like. I think the ruck's an issue too. Trent West sort of really hasn't improved to the level they hoped. McIntosh, as you say, injured again. You know, Vardy's had his injury issues. And there'll be a lot of commentators hoping that Blitzarves doesn't get much footy because it's a really tough name to say in the heat of the moment. But, you know, I just think in terms of general talent, they've still got enough senior players contributing. I like the way they've brought through the young blokes. Chris Scott, really good coach, very well-run club. I don't see them falling far. I've got them in the bottom half of the 8.
Yeah. We're just going to have to blitz through.
There's only so much you can say about these top 5 teams, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, West Coast was 5th last year, ravaged by injuries. They're still quite young, you know. They've got, you know, Shuey, Gaff, you know, Scott Selwood, all these young mids coming through that are only going to improve with time. Jack Darling, who was steel at where he went in 2010, I believe. And Scott Lycett's certainly done himself, you know, all the good that he can in the pre-season with Nick Naitanui set to miss the first maybe round or 2. He should get a game. And as well, it's been widely reported that West Coast have really had the basically head of the competition in terms of training regimen and that sort of thing. Players poached from them, well, not poached or traded, like Quentin Lynch to the Magpies and Brad Ebert to the Power, Port Adelaide Power. You know, they've really stepped up and basically been the number 1 trainer at the club. And it's Colin Young, a player manager, is really saying, you know, they might be the club that people target, and Mark Lacroix heads the list of free agents for the upcoming year, and he's certainly set up for a big pay packet in terms of, you know, whether or not he stays at West Coast, and he's certainly going to be adequately compensated.
The hallmark for a good team is being able to cover your bases, and as far as depth goes, West Coast is by far the best team in the competition. With that said, that doesn't just go for injuries. I mean, if a player's in bad form and they're playing a game, someone else is going to kick their goals, someone else is going to get their hit-outs, someone else is going to stop their big men, the opposition big men. West Coast have one of the most perfect lists this year, and you'd be amazed if they didn't finish top 4.
I'll be quick. They're going to win the flag. Best home ground advantage in the comp, and they play half their games there. Great rucks. great stock of talls who are not only forwards, they're very damaging midfield as well. And I think people miss that they can take contested marks in the middle of the ground. It's not just about them going forward and kicking goals. Their defence is a lot better than people give them credit for. It's not just glass. You've got Eric McKenzie's improved rapidly. Will Schofield's improved rapidly. Shannon Hearn, fantastic rebounder. And depth. No better example of their depth in the midfield. They've got, I think I counted them, 15 bona fide midfielders. Even Collingwood, who probably been regarded as having great midfield depth, they've only got about 11. So, and it's all on the improve. Maston, Shuey, Gaff, there are guys who are going to keep getting better and better. So to me, unless, something goes desperately wrong in terms of injuries or luck, they to me are the flag side this year.
Yep, me too. Collingwood next, fourth in 2012. Buckley's second year as head coach. Surely the players would have had more time in a full pre-season to learn the game plan. Lots of natural improvement. They're still quite a relatively young side in terms of average age goes. But no more Dawes, no more Chris Dawes. He's gone to Melbourne. Quentin Lynch takes his place, but he's 30 years old now, so you've got to think who have they got to cover him after this year or maybe next year. You've got Jackson Payne coming up, or maybe Brodie Grundy as well, but he suffered an unfortunate setback with stress fractures in his back. He was looking like a massive steal. He was a massive steal in the draft, going at 18, I think it was. And they've picked up a few free agents in the off-season as well, Jordan Russell and Clinton Young, as well as Quentin Lynch there. Not sure how many games they'll play, but like you said, their depth is really good, Collingwood. Jordan Russell, I think, will be a very good pickup for them. Not so much Clinton Young. He's too much of an outside player, in my opinion. He tends to just bomb it long in any situation. He has a huge hoof on him, but I don't see him being a big pickup. But certainly top four again for Collingwood, in my opinion. And Dane Swan will have another great year, in my opinion.
As far as I'm concerned, if Collingwood gets it right this year and everything falls into place, they've got the premiership in the bag. Most people will be saying West Coast, but I said Collingwood from the very start, and I don't think anything's going to really change that because nothing's changed. They're playing good football. They might have lost a few pre-season games, but they're playing good football. They've got a good list. They're my pick for the flag.
I think one thing that has changed is the defence. I don't think it's quite the defence it was. It doesn't rebound as well. I think Maxwell's not the player he was, and Harry O'Brien, they're almost sort of turning into a wingman. So I think defence is an issue. I think the quickness of their ball movement is an issue, hence the recruiting of Lynch, Young and Russell, all very long kicks, so that's been a focus for them. But I agree, the midfield stocks are terrific. Lynch can be a really decent goal kicker to go with Cloak, and just, real out-and-out class midfield, Pendlebury, Swan, Thomas, Ball, etc., etc. So for me, they're right up there. The defence is a little bit of a concern. And the pattern of play is interesting too, because they did start out last year trying to do something a bit different, but then sort of went back to their old ways. So can Buckley get them to play continually the style of game he wants? So for me, bordering on top four flag chance.
Yeah. Sydney next, third in 2012, but won the premiership. Solid all around the ground, in my opinion. They don't really have an area of weakness. You've got a good team when Sydney supporters are saying Heath Grundy is the worst player, and he's a very solid defender. Tippett's inclusion midway through the season, we'll have to see how that impacts them. Will it disrupt the team, or will it give them another target up forward to help Sam Reid and Adam Goods? And Goods has stepped down as captain as well. He did his PCL in the grand final, but arguably was one of the players that won them the match. Do you think he can take his game back to the level when he won the Brownlow medal, or since he doesn't have the captaincy looming over his head?
Well, he's 33. I doubt we can say that.
Well, he's a great player.
He's a fantastic player. I think that's unanimous, but I don't think he's going to reach that Brownlow form once again. That's a big ask.
Good call, honest call.
I think there's a bit of I think there's a bit of a sense of Geelong of 2011 with Sydney this year, in that not everyone, but a lot of people are expecting him to slide down the ladder, and there's really no reason to suggest why they would, other than the quality and rising quality of other teams.
They're the same team from last year.
Well, that's
the
it.
Inclusion of Tippett.
I mean, I think Sydney could finish anywhere between first and seventh, in my opinion.
Great team ethos. I mean, I think, a lot depends on other sides too. I think other sides have more natural talent, but I don't think any side's got as good a workman-like attitude and team ethic as the Swans do. So I've got them finishing runner-up. I think everything needs to go right for them to do that, but well coached. They've got the experience now. You think Hanbury, Jack, etc. will go on to be even better players than they already are. And Tippett's a fantastic addition to the forward line, so they should be thereabouts.
Should at least make the prelim, in my opinion. I've got Collingwood West Coast making the grand final, though. Adelaide second. They had a dream draw last year. Draw's above average this year. It's not as good as it was last year. But Kurt Tippett leaving, you've got Taylor Walker taking up the definitive number one key forward position. Who do you think's going to take up the second forward? It will be Josh Jenkins, McKernan, Lewis Johnston. I think they've still got on their list there. So it's really a very inexperienced second forward that we'll be seeing up there. Maybe even Tom Lynch. But they've got a lot of up and coming young midfielders in Dangerfield, Sloane, and Crouch. Dangerfield's set to explode, in my opinion. He could win the Brownlow this year. And Sloane is again one of the very unassuming players from Adelaide, but classic looks like Jane. Well, opposite of the classic looks like Jane, but plays like Tarzan. And you've got Bernie Vince and Van Berlo and Mackay,
I think.
That's running through the midfield.
Matthew Wright as well. So a fantastic year.
He is, yeah, and you've still got Scott Thompson. They're definitely going to be in the top 8. Maybe just outside the top 4 with only one key forward. It might be easy to isolate, Taylor Walker rather than, have to keep someone on Tippett and someone on Walker. You can really have the second man coming up there.
Yeah, the support for Walker's pretty interesting. I've actually already written a piece for next week about this, and I think Jenkins will be the guy that gets the first crack at it. And, still very raw. He's only played 11 games. That is a big issue for them, because not in terms of, Tippett's a great player, didn't necessarily have that great a year last year, but it means they've got to sort of reorganise the structure, and Walker's got to click with another key forward, which, it's easier said than done. So that'll be a learning process for them. I think in light of that, they need a pretty big year from Paul Pleasure. He's important to them. Another one who could, not very highly rated, but I think he's very capable and could come in and do that sort of role is Ricky Henderson. Because like Paul Pleasure, he sort of plays tall. He's taller than he looks. Great midfield. I agree with you on Dangerfield. I think he's my Brownlow tip. Tick all the boxes, but I think the Tippett thing could actually hit home in terms of their structure. So I've got them, bottom half of the 8.
Look, I think the most important thing with Adelaide's forward line isn't necessarily the second big forward, but the output from, as you mentioned, Paul Pleasure, Callanan and John Cox, the other one. I think if they can combine for 70, 80 goals between, Paul Pleasure and Callanan kicked 60 goals between them last year, so John Cox been in goal-kicking form this pre-season. If they can combine for those 80 goals, I think Taylor Walker's going to be the forward to step up this year. That's all of a sudden 140 goals in between those 4 forwards, and when you chuck in another tall forward in there, hopefully another developing tall forward, all of a sudden they look dangerous.
Just got to do something about the hair, Taylor Walker, because it's gone beyond mullet stage too. Yeah. It's sort of like Sunbury 73 stage now.
There's nothing on Ivan. Anyway, for Hawthorn, number 1 in 2012, but unfortunately did not win the grand final. Do you think they have much longer? Like you said before, they've got Sewell and Mitchell and Hodge and Burgoyne and Lake now, all these old 30 or 29 plus players.
Yeah.
So I'd say they've got maybe 1 year left.
Yeah, 1 or 2. I think as much as age, it's a thing we talked about earlier about scope for improvement. You've got to, and so you can see that with West Coast. You can see those young midfielders getting better. I look at Hawthorn's midfield. Is it going to get any better than it already is? They'd be looking at someone like Brad Hill, Stephen's brother, to step up. Big raps on him. Jack Gunston's one I think who can get better still from where he's at already.
Their forward line's outstanding still.
Yeah, it is. Look, talent dictates they should be around the mark. But, Suckling could be a sizable loss. They really, which means it's going to put more pressure on I guess, Guerra, Birchall to do that playmaking role. It wouldn't take many more injuries for you to start worrying about do they have enough depth, which is funny to say about the side that, after all, probably should have won the flag last year. But assessing how a side's going to go, you've got to weigh them up relative to the other sides. And I see other sides improving perhaps a bit more than the Hawks. I think, all going well, I've still got them as a grand finalist, but losing it again, which, Hawthorn supporters hate me anyway, so I'm sure they won't be surprised to hear that.
An interesting stat as well, Pete beside me just informed me about. Apparently since the NAB Cup has started, a team that's gone winless in the NAB Cup has not won a final in the season to follow. So
is that right?
Yeah, interesting.
Okay. Good stat.
We've got a great article coming out on Bound for Glory News. It's going to be coming out either in the next day or two that indicates and highlights the issues with Hawthorn's list at the moment. They traded away a lot of the the draft picks to get those mature age players that are ready to win a premiership. That didn't necessarily eventuate. I think this year or maybe next year will be their last chance. The window's definitely on the back end of the premiership window. This is their year. If they're going to win it, it'll be this year, I think.
Now we'll just have a look at some of the rule changes for 2013.
Finally, after a big old hour-long segment.
I'll quickly just breeze through these ones. So there's 3 new changes of the rules in 2013. There's 3 rules, one called forceful contact below the knees, separation of ruckman at stoppages, and also umpires to throw up the ball around the ground. So the forceful contact below the knees, basically what happens is if a free kick will be given to the opposition if a player makes forceful contact with any part of their body to a player below the knees, excluding if it's with their hands or their arms from a smother. So basically if someone goes sliding into a player and hits them with their back, that will be a free kick to the opposition. It's also a reportable offence for rough conduct if the umpire deems the contact to be unnecessary. It's an extension of the 2012 sliding rule introduction. So if they want to slide, as I said, they can't make any contact below the knees, and it's now a reportable offence. The good thing about this rule is that serious knee and leg injuries can be prevented. So when someone slides into a contest, essentially they are cutting off the path of the opponent, and this can often cause tripping, and it's extremely dangerous. So this rule could stop incidents such as the Gary Rohan one last year. The negative thing is, though, that it could be another issue of interpretation with the umpire, because what will the umpire deem as forceful contact?
I think if these are the sort of changes we're going to go by every year, if we fast forward to 2020, AFL's going to have... It's going to look like players running around with floaties and everyone has a megaphone and they have to call out when they're going for the ball to let everybody know so nobody gets hurt. I mean... There's a limit on how much you can restrict the contact in football, because a player is taught to go in hard at the football, and sometimes there's a leg in the way, sometimes somebody else has gone in to get the football, sometimes you just nick a player. That's how football goes. And at the moment the rules are that, or at least in previous years it's been, that if you go in and you accidentally knock somebody, then it's a free kick. That's fine with me. There's no reason to add on to that. As far as the game goes, these sort of rules, it's really making it so that a lot of players are going to be hanging out the back of packs, and it's going to be 1 or 2 players going in for a ball and hoping that they shovel it out, rather than the physical tackle fest that we really want to be seeing.
Dyson Heppel's dream, then. They had this situation last night as well in the game where I think it was Karnisis was had his leg slid into, but they didn't pay it. So that's another interpretation thing.
Yeah, that's the problem. You've got to see how they're going to interpret it and if it's going to cause more problems than good.
Can I just say, I think you've said 3 rule changes, which they've announced, but almost, for me, the most important one, they never actually... We had a briefing from Jeff Geishan, and it was only when I asked him he said this, and it comes back to this thing about congestion, which they're... we're all sort of talking about congestion. The throw up instead of the bounce down will save 2 to 3 seconds. So I know that's mentioned, but the one they haven't mentioned is they're going to call the umpires to ball it up quicker. And this has been my hobby horse for about 2 years. You want to get rid of congestion. Stop letting a dozen players mill around the ball waiting for it to come out, and then when you do ball it up, there's a dozen players around the stoppage. You have a look at footage from the 70s, 80s, even 90s. The umpires call for ball ups a lot more quickly than they have in the last 10 years. Now, they're going to do that again, and basically Jeff Gershin agrees. So I think you will see less congestion as a result simply of that one this year and the throw up instead of the bounce down, which is why, and I know it's not coming in for the season proper, the interchange cap thing I just think is cracking a walnut with a sledgehammer, because those two measures with the throw up and the quicker throw up are going to get rid of congestion. Why not wait to see if they work before we introduce the rotation cap? Now, on your point, Matt, 49 rule changes in the last 20 years we've had now with these ones. Now, that's too many by anyone's measure. You know, I can think of 3 or 4 that have been pretty beneficial. A lot of them have been tinkering around the edges and often fixing up the unintended consequences of previous rule changes. So it's like a dog chasing its tail. I really hope that if the thing with the throw up and the quicker throw up this year does get rid of the congestion, we will just sit back for a while and look at it and say, you know, let's see how the game evolves naturally.
How can, just as a quick question, how can you expect to be able to effectively bring in a cap on interchange, which will be brought in next year? It's already been said by Demetrio that it will be brought in regardless of, you know, what the players and what the coaches think. How is that going to go in positively with faster ball-ins, faster ball-ups, faster kick-ins, faster everything, if the players aren't able to rotate? I mean, anybody who saw the NAB Cup Grand Final and watched the third quarter saw that was Exhibit A of what's going to happen when that restriction comes in. It's just going to be bowling the ball long, a lot of chipping around the back line, and it's not good viewing.
No, I agree, and it's a contradiction in terms too, because they want to have this thing about continuous play, but if the players are too buggered to play properly, it's going to be pretty bloody slow continuous play. So, and the other thing about the interchange numbers is they're sort of hoping to fatigue players to a level that they don't get to as many contests. And, you know, these other measures that the umpires have charge of, they can eliminate the congestion like that. This is sort of like step A leads to step B, which hopefully will lead to step C. I don't see the connection. So, yeah, like I said, too many rule changes overall for mine. I hope these ones with the throw up and the quicker throw up really have an impact.
Look, we had a massive pre-season in regards to big stories. We had those 2 big clubs with the drug issues, and then we had Kurt Tippett's saga before that. One that sort of went under the radar a bit was the idea of bringing in a luxury tax, as it's called, for the AFL. It's similar to something that that major American competitions run on. Basically, Deputy CEO Gillan McLachlan confirmed that the AFL is considering the tax and have already sent out a brief discussion to clubs and had brief chats with clubs. Essentially, the tax means that clubs will be charged more than what will be a determined set amount for spending in their football department. So, for example, say there's a 10% tax. If Collingwood spends $2 million in excess in its football department, it will then have to pay $200,000. That money would then go into a general pool, and that money would then be used to sort of fuel the lower clubs in the competition. This is apparently part of the equalisation plans the AFL is trying to bring in. As part of those equalisation plans, the AFL is also considering splitting the gate takings from matches, increasing the money distributed to the struggling clubs. This is an issue that McLachlan believes is a serious problem that needs to be solved, and he did say that equalisation is a real challenge for us in terms of helping clubs with stadium disadvantages and other disadvantages to compete.
Well, if they want to deal with the stadium disadvantages in terms of the deals, why don't they just buy Etihad Stadium?
Well, see, this is the crazy thing. The AFL is going to inherit Etihad Stadium in 2025. Apparently, the only fee the AFL has to pay before they get it is $200 million, and that's obviously a big number. But considering the estimated value of Etihad Stadium is going to be $1.2 billion in 2025, paying $200 million for that stadium to have it now really is, you know, it's a massive investment, and they're going to a massive profit from that investment. And clubs have mentioned that. Clubs have already come out and said, hang on, why don't you go out and buy that? I believe Essendon, Hawthorn and Collingwood CEOs have come out and mentioned that if we do buy Etihad Stadium, we're going to be making money from soccer games, going to be making money from cricket games, and that money can directly go to the struggling clubs rather than taking out of the rich and feeding the poor. I think it was Eddie McGuire that mentioned that it really is robbing the rich to give to the poor, and it's punishing clubs for being innovative with their football department spending. And it really sort of sets football back in a way, and as far as not letting clubs be innovative and discover different alternatives in that area.
I don't necessarily agree with that last point, mainly because I come from a real socialist upbringing. So the concept of stealing from the rich to give to the poor, I'm a big supporter of. But innovation is one thing, but I think, you know, innovation can only be sort of backed up by resources. And some clubs inherently have better access to resources than others purely because of a historical geographical legacy. North Melbourne, for instance, you know, has always struggled for its place in the pecking order primarily because it came into the competition later than Carlton, Collingwood, Essendon, and it's never had as well served a geographic supporter base. So it can be as innovative as it likes. And North, really, if you go back to the mid-'80s in terms of Friday night footy, a whole lot of marketing initiatives, even back in the 70s. North's been as innovative as any club, but hasn't been rewarded for that financially. So I think those disadvantages are sort of entrenched, and you need the governing body to actually step in and actively promote equalisation. Now, we already have a salary cap and a draft, which have been great impacts on the field, but we've got to be very careful. I don't know about anyone else here, but I don't want us to end up like the English Premier League, where only 4 teams ever have a chance of winning, and if you barrack for Fulham or someone, it's almost like, what's the point? You're just going along sort of making up the numbers. I'd hate footy to get like that. So if the experts are saying that the disparity in football club spending is getting greater and it's having more of an impact, I'm happy to listen to that, and I'm happy for them also to institute measures to even things up so every team does have a genuine shot at winning a flag.
Well, you've got...
Yeah, I mean, that's again, a legacy of my political upbringing, but I think footy has socialist measures. Why not enshrine them further?
It's not as dire as the Premier League, but you sort of see that now starting. You know, you don't see your West Coast, your Adelaides, your Collingwoods, your big rich clubs leaving the 8 at all, or very often at all. I mean, especially since the 2000s, it's been quite rare to see one of those sides miss the 8.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can start to wrap this show up. Probably get around to our round the table predictions for the year. Obviously, we went through the team previews and we started to discuss what we thought the teams how they go for the year, and we didn't really get to predictions. We didn't really say who's going to win the premiership definitively. There's Coleman, there's Brownlow, there's Rising Star, there's all those sorts of things. So.
Should do that really quickly, I think.
we should do that quickly. Well, I think I agree with what Rohan said earlier, that West Coast look like the premiership team at the moment. I think while they've got a few injuries at the moment, I think they'll really start to consolidate their spot up in the top half of the ladder and have a big finish to the year, and I think they can win the premiership.
Yeah, let's just go around the panel for starters. Premiership, so Marsden.
Yeah, I said Collingwood at the start of the year, and I'm not going to change my mind on that. Obviously, West Coast is the more appealing option, I suppose, but when you really nut it down, there's no real reason why Collingwood can't win the premiership other than West Coast winning it. So I'm going to stick with Collingwood solely because I got the gut feeling. Yeah, that's all I'm going on, to be honest.
West Coast for me to beat Collingwood in the grand final.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah, I'm West Coast to beat Collingwood as well.
Yeah, I've got West Coast winning. Collingwood second. I think Collingwood will bounce back this year. We're really ravaged by injuries last season and should come on this season. But yeah, I reckon West Coast.
Yeah, West Coast to beat Hawthorn for me.
Ooh.
Is it sort of unanimous when we say that Cochin's probably going to win the Brownlow as far as
No.
our predictions? No.
I would like it.
No.
Not clear cut. I'd say Cochin. He stepped it up. Yeah, even Dangerfield, yeah.
I think most people's top threes would probably comprise of Cochin, Pendlebury and Dangerfield.
Yep.
I was going to go with
I'd say
Pendlebury.
Ablett. Can't forget Ablett.
All right, let's
win
make
fast,
it
got to win
official.
games.
Let's make it
That's
official.
happened.
No,
So-
but Ablett finished, second, third?
Yeah,
Last season, so-
the bars sort of shifted on the Brownlow thing because I think Ablett has sort of proven you can be from a non-final side and poll really well in the last couple of years, and obviously Watson last year. Dangerfield's my tip for what it's worth.
Cochin.
I'm going to say something out there and say Mitchell.
Ooh.
Yeah, he's finished, top 3, I think, in the
Yeah,
past
got second.
2
Yeah, I
seasons?
said him last year as well, but hopefully
Well,
this year.
2011 he had 30 votes and unfortunately was suspended, so that second is unofficial.
Yeah, I think Cochin for me.
I'll go with Koch as well.
Coleman?
I think Lance Franklin's probably the one that's sort of... I know a lot of people are saying, as far as Travis Cloke's contract went, it made him go really poorly. If you look at form, Lance Franklin's form this pre-season, he's looked good in the time that he's played the general role that he will play during the season. He's a big marking forward. He can kick the miracle goals. I think at the moment, the only two people that could beat him, in my opinion, are Taylor Walker and Travis Cloke. Travis Cloke solely because he'll want to rebound. He's got the fresh contract. He doesn't have to think about the contract. And Taylor Walker simply because I think he's the young key forward to watch.
That's harsh on Jack Rewald, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sold on Jack Rewald, to be honest. I think Richmond are going to start focusing on other targets in Richmond's forward line.
They've been saying that for years.
I really like Rewald, but Franklin for me is probably the second best player in the competition. You know, needs to clean up his kicking for goal a bit, but an absolute champion. He'd be my Coleman tip.
I want to go with Taylor Walker personally. I think now that he's got the first forward spot locked up, I think that it's a really big year set for him.
I don't agree with you at all, Martin. I think Jack Rewald's going to win.
Didn't you predict the double, the Koch and Brownlow and the
Rewald?
No,
I predicted. I think I had Dangerfield #1, but I had Rewald #1 for my prediction on boundforglorynews.com.
Plug.
I'm going to say Walker. Purely because he's the go-to man, but don't disregard Pavlich, I think.
I'll say Walker, but if teams can find him out and double team him, now that his old mate Tippett isn't there anymore, it'll be a bit of a hassle for him trying to win it.
He's just waiting for a mate.
Otherwise, a bit of a smoky, Josh Kennedy of West Coast. I reckon he might come on.
Too many competitors, I think, in that forward line. Far too many people. Darling, and then to have Nick Nat rotating through, he'll be a target.
I mean, even
same with Franklin though.
Even someone like Schultz, I think, could win it because he was injured last year and he averaged quite a few goals. When
Schultz
he
is definitely underrated as far as it goes. I think that'll wrap up our first show of the season. Thank you very much for coming in, Rohan, Connolly. Third time, as I mentioned, you're basically a veteran, so you know where the door is.
To come back, not to leave, by the way.
No, pleasure, guys. Always need the work, so feel free to invite me back.
No worries. Be sure to catch our podcast every weekend on Saturday. Uploaded around what time, do you think?
Yeah.
Midday,
whenever we get to it.
When it's up.
Yeah,
we'll be there when it's up.
Follow us on Twitter, Bound for Glory FM.
That's it.
As well as Bound for, the number 4, Glory News. And check out boundforglorynews.com as well.
And of course, read The Age as well. Rohan Connolly, fantastic writer for The Age. So, it doesn't really need much support, but get around it anyway.
No, The Age needs all the support it can get. So buy in plenty of numbers.
It's better than a certain other outlet that we will divert from. That'll wrap up our first show of the year. Thank you very much for listening. It's been a big old 2-hour show, I'm pretty sure. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you next week.
I'm invincible. I'm paying money. The girl's happy. She's got no money. I got my rocks off. Oh, how good is this?
See you later, you odd-shaped